right, well, welcome everyone to the CSPDM webinar this morning on accommodating menopause in the workplace. As you heard us talking here on our panel, we're excited to be here. And thank you so much for joining us in this really important conversation. My name is Lani DeHeck, and I am a manager with the BC Nurses Union in Disability Management department, but I'm also one of the board members for the Canadian Society Professionals in Disability Management, the CSPDM. And I'm joined today with my co-moderator, Lorraine.
Nice.
No, go ahead.
Please finish. My apologies.
No, I was just starting to say Lorraine was just going to introduce herself, so I'll let you do that.
Okay, thank you. So hi, everyone. My name is Lorraine Evans. I am Director of Employee Experience right now at Canada Post. My background is in disability management, and I do sit on the board of directors for the CSPDM with Lani, as well as on the board of directors of NIDMAR, National Institute of Disability Management and Research, and PCU University.
Thank you.
Lani, did you want me to continue?
Sure, with the agenda?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. I'm sorry. Sorry, everyone. Just a little bit back and forth there. So I really want to start by saying how excited I am to be on this call today, talking about this particular subject. Women represent almost half of the Canadian workforce and make a significant contribution to the economy. And as companies look to improve their diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's time to break the silence and taboo around menopause in the workplace. And in fact, I would say that is true, not just in the workplace, but outside of the workplace. We were just chatting for those who started early. But as I was preparing for this call, talking to women in general in different situations, I was absolutely shocked by the number of women who said to me, we don't talk about this. I've never talked about this. I didn't have anyone to talk to about this. Like shocked. Women in restaurants, security guards. I was talking to everybody, and that was sort of a universal. And so on this call, for you, disability management professionals, you can play an integral role in helping employers create menopause inclusive policies and practices that include accommodation if that becomes necessary. We're very excited to have Janet Coe, President and co-founder of Menopause Foundation of Canada, here to speak with us today. Janet will be sharing her own personal journey, important findings from groundbreaking research, and best practices for supporting women in the workforce struggling due to symptoms of menopause. We're hoping that you're going to take away from this call a better understanding of the scope of menopause and its impact within the workforce, the workplace, for individuals and for organizations. That to see menopause as an equity issue for women in Canada, workplace opportunities for accommodation and best practices, and how to help reduce the stigma and promote a menopause inclusive workplace to improve stay at work and return to work outcomes. I'm going to pass back to Lani, but after the session, after Janet speaks to us, there'll be a Q&A. So feel free to put your questions into the chat box as we go. I'll monitor them and bring them back at the end of the call for Janet and Lani and myself. And I'll pass back to you, Lani. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine. So yes, we are coming from you coast to coast, I guess, here. And I think on that note, I just wanted to say that, acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the Coast Salish speaking people in Tsawwassen and Musqueam folk out here on the BC in what we call the Delta area now. So I invite you each to just do a self-reflection on your area and your own land acknowledgement if you wish to do that. This webinar is about an hour and a half, and you'll be sent an email following from Zoom that acknowledges this for 1.5 continuing education credits. So it will come directly from the Zoom link for those of you who are CSPDM and wish to use that for your continuing education. Now, without further ado, I am so pleased to invite and welcome Janet Coe, who is the president and co-founder of Menopause Foundation of Canada. Janet has held numerous senior leadership positions in pharmaceuticals, global life science, and the senior living sector. She has served on the management teams of leading Canadian companies as the Senior Vice President of Communications and has led marketing and organizational development functions throughout her career. An award-winning creator of innovative communication campaigns, Janet has launched thought leadership programs focused on raising awareness of ageism and fostering intergenerational learning. She is dedicated to helping women thrive through their menopausal years and advocates for system change to improve women's health. Janet is a passionate speaker on menopause and believes women deserve to feel healthy in the prime of their lives. She received her Master's of Arts in Journalism from Western University and holds a Queen's University certificate in Organization Development. Welcome, Janet, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Lanny and Lorraine. I'm so delighted to be with you today and very grateful that your organization is spending a little bit of time thinking about an issue which Lorraine has so appropriately said is a gender equity issue in our country. And I encourage you, I know you're all here looking at how you can support your organizations, but I hope you also really absorb some of this information and think about yourself as a woman going through life and how these changes may be impacting you as well. So our organization, the Menopause Foundation of Canada, we believe that women deserve to feel healthy in the prime of their lives. And we think that if we're going to optimize health for women going through their menopausal years, that we need to change the conversation on aging. And we also need to crack open the discussion about menopause. It's really interesting, you know, if you think about other natural life transitions in our society, there's education and support when you're going through puberty. There's coming of age stories, there's conversations with friends and family when you're going through that time of life. There's support when we're trying not to get pregnant, when we're trying to get pregnant, when we're having our children. Thankfully, there's now recognition and support for things like postpartum depression, when we're integrating back into the workforce. None of it is perfect, but there is support available. When it comes to menopause, the years leading up to it and the years after it, the conversation, open dialogue, societal support, workplace support, healthcare support, that really disappears. And we need to change that. Just to level set all of us in terms of what is menopause. And I think sadly, there are many people who don't really understand what menopause is. I was speaking with a wonderful young leader, gentleman, who is leading a team of women. And he actually, when he learned about what I was doing, he said, "Can you remind me again, what is menopause?" And I think that just speaks to the secrecy of menopause and how it is shrouded in this secrecy, which leads to stigma. Menopause is a natural phase of life. It's a universal experience. If you live long enough, it will happen to you. It simply is when our ovaries stop producing eggs, which means we go through that falling levels of hormones. And then eventually we get to a point where we are period free for 1 year, and then we can say that we are in menopause. But there are years leading up to it, known as perimenopause, and the years after it, postmenopause, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But menopause is technically 1 day, period free for a year. Why should we care about this? We should really care because it's an important topic. There are 10 million women in Canada over the age of 40. We represent more than 1/4 of the population, and yet our needs related to menopause have been overlooked. This not only has a negative impact on women's health, but it has an impact on women's abilities to support their family, to do things that they'd like to do, contributing at their maximum level in the community, in the workplace, and in other facets of life. Overall, this has a net negative impact, not only on women's health, but on Canada's economy and on our overall society as a whole. I'm going to share with you my own personal experience with menopause. I was truly blindsided by menopause. at the height of my professional career, in my mid-40s, I had quite a large job. I was an SVP of communications with a large team, working for an organization that had 20,000 employees, hundreds of sites. I was on the management team, and I had not heard of the word perimenopause. For me, when I thought of menopause, which was rarely, I just assumed it would happen at some point in my 50s, that I might have a few hot flashes, but then things would be great, that I would no longer have periods, I would no longer have to worry about getting pregnant, and that this would actually just usher in a wonderful phase of life. And of course, I was quite surprised at the reality of what happened to me. I am one of the 1 in 10 women who leave the workforce because of menopause. I didn't know that at the time. I only know that looking through the rearview mirror and really understanding all of the symptoms that were happening to me, because at the time I was so in the dark about menopause, I really couldn't connect the dots. I did not know what was happening to my body, did not understand the changes I was going through. And as a result, I really had a long and winding path to wellness. And I'm happy to say I'm 55 today. And after probably about a decade of trying to figure all of this out, feel stronger and healthier than I have, in the last couple of decades of my life. So what was happening to me when I'm at the height of my professional career? I essentially started having these symptoms that I did not attribute to being in perimenopause because I hadn't heard of the term. So I started having night sweats. I went through chronic sleep deprivation. The night sweats I did not know were a menopausal symptom. I just thought, oh my goodness, my sheets are too hot. My clothing is, my pajamas need to be changed. That led to chronic sleep deprivation, fatigue, extreme fatigue. I would wake up every morning with joint pain, body aches. I felt like in the mornings I was so stiff that I couldn't move. This was not because I was exercising, because believe me, I was so exhausted that I didn't have the energy to do the things that you're supposed to do, like exercising and all of that. I had brain fog, a lot of forgetfulness, and I consider myself a fairly forgetful person. My family would attest to that, but this was becoming quite severe in my mind. I would be leaving the stove on. I would, one incident, I went to work. I had got there very early in the morning. My car was one of the first ones in the parking garage, was one of the last ones to leave. And I go into the parking garage and I see my car all by itself there, and it's turned on. You can see the exhaust coming out of the back, and I'm thinking, oh, isn't that funny? Why is my car on? And I'm looking around thinking, is my husband here? Did my teenage sons come to surprise me? And then of course your mind starts going through the loops and thinking that, well, that's silly. They wouldn't have done that. Get to the car and realize I've left it on all day. My car was left on with the keys inside, and thankfully nobody drove away with it. But that's just one example of things that I did. Once I drove to the airport for a trip to Montreal, came back the next day and forgot that I drove my car to the airport, took a cab home. And again, my husband and my kids say, where's the car? And I said, well, what do you mean? It's in the garage. And they're like, no, it's at the airport. In meetings at work, the brain fog for me just felt like I had cotton in my head. I was slower to be able to process information, and I wasn't as sharp as I normally was with articulating my thoughts. And that really bothered me because I prided myself, as so many professional career women do, on being at the top of your game all the time. And I think there's a lot of pressure for professional women to always be performing at their best, and a lot of judgment on them if they're not. So started to have that. Then I had these heart palpitations. And again, didn't know that that was actually a symptom of perimenopause, and thought I was going to have a heart attack. For me, I have heart disease in the family. My father died when he was 61 years old of a heart attack. And so this started to worry me. I went to different doctors. Everybody said, your heart is fine, you're strong, you're healthy. One night it was so bad, I actually went to Emerge and, had all the monitors hooked up. And again, the wonderful emergency room doctor said, you have a very healthy heart and you're fine. Don't worry about this. Nobody ever once said, you're a 40-something-year-old woman. This is a symptom of perimenopause. Now that we've ruled out that you don't have a heart issue, you can be assured that this is a common symptom because you're in the zone of a certain age. I would go to bed at night with baby aspirin beside my bedside because I had read that if you are having a heart attack, if you take a baby aspirin, that's going to help. And recently, Oprah Winfrey came out and she shared her menopausal experience. And she actually had the same issues with heart palpitations. So it is a symptom that people don't recognize, but of course it becomes worrisome. Then I had some crying spells, which were not like me. I'm not a weepy person. And overall, I just felt burnt out. And I have to say, I attributed that to my work because I thought, and I did have a very high stress role. There were a lot of issues management. This was a 24/7 job. It was the weekends, it was evenings, it was connecting on vacations, things like that. But I loved that. I thrived in that environment, but started to feel burnt out. And I actually tried to quit my job twice. So the first time I just said, I'm done and I've achieved my SVP level. I'm going to change my career. And my company said to me, no, we think it's just the reality of how stressful things have been in the organization. Please take a year off and come back. We want you to come back. And I did that. And things were better when I was off, but I still had all of these symptoms that I still did not connect to being in perimenopause. Go back to work. Then I start having 20 hot flashes a day. Then I start having period changes. That's when I realized, I'm going to be going into menopause. I did end up leaving my role because I just thought that, I had achieved what I wanted to in my career. And I did still feel burnt out, still did not attribute that to these menopausal symptoms that weren't managed, left my role, then realized I'm going to go into menopause, tried every herbal supplement, menopausal herbal products, started doing yoga, diet, exercise. Nothing worked for me. Until I found an OB-GYN who specialized in menopause. And this doctor explained to me the benefits of taking hormone therapy, not just the risks, realized I was a great candidate. And that for me was a game changer. Within a week, I started to feel good, started to have my energy back. And then, of course, was able to do all the things that you should do, like the diet and the exercise, and really have had a long and winding path to wellness, but am feeling great. And share that story with you in a little bit more detail than I would with other audiences, because I know the work you do, it's important that you understand what women can be going through in the workplace. And I hope that that's helpful to you. Then once I realized I was in menopause, started to do all kinds of research because I felt like there wasn't enough information. I also felt embarrassed that I had not known that some of my symptoms were menopausal symptoms. How could I not know? I consider myself an educated, privileged woman with access to all kinds of information and resources, and yet I couldn't figure it out. I was actually quite embarrassed and ashamed of myself that I had gotten to that point in my life and did not understand menopause. And then I realized all of the myth information about this time of life, that menopause is just one day. Again, it's 12 months period free, but you can be in perimenopause anywhere from 4 to 8 years of your life. And then once you reach menopause, it's not over. You don't get through it to some mythical other side. You're in postmenopause for your entire life. Women will spend up to half of their lives in menopause. And you just need to do the math. Most women enter menopause between the ages of 45 and 55. And if you're in perimenopause for 48 years, we've got women entering their perimenopausal years into their 30s and early 40s. The average age to reach menopause in our country is 51. And some of these numbers were startling to me. 1 in 100 women enter menopause before the age of 40, 1 in 1,000 before the age of 30. This is not some little topic that is going to impact women, so-called older women in their 50s and beyond. We need to get serious about menopause. It's an equity issue because of the lack of information that is available about it. Another big moment that really drove us to create the Menopause Foundation of Canada was this knowledge that we gained that in postmenopause, again, it's not over. Women can experience hot flashes, night sweats, and those menopausal symptoms for several years or more after they reach menopause. 10 to 15% of 40% of women experience hot flashes and night sweats into their 50s and 60s, 10 to 15% into their 70s and beyond. There's certain women they call super hot flashers. So these symptoms don't go away for many women. The good news is that for the majority of women, the hot flashes and the night sweats, those tend to disappear after you reach menopause. And for most women, they'll start disappearing within 4 to 7 years. Just think about that though for a moment. We're talking about women suffering through symptoms for a decade or more. Is there any other health condition where you would just say to women, just deal with that, put up with that, struggle through that, you'll get through it. But then you realize there isn't this magical other side. So the health risks that were quite surprising to us, osteoporosis. We have estrogen receptors all over our bodies. That's why we have so many symptoms when we go through menopause, because we're losing all of our estrogen. So there's receptors in our bones, in our heart, in our brain, in most of our cells in our bodies. Osteoporosis, once we're in menopause, we are at increased risk for osteoporosis because our bones love estrogen and the estrogen is disappearing. 1 in 3 women in our country will break a bone due to osteoporosis in our lifetime. Fractures from osteoporosis are more common than heart attack, stroke, and breast cancer alone. We lose bone density beginning in perimenopause and then lasting 5 to 10 years in postmenopause. If women understood this, we would, for example, prioritize weight-bearing exercises in our 30s and 40s and beyond. It's this lack of knowledge that it is our menopause that is driving our osteoporosis risk that leads to us not having the knowledge to control our health. Heart health, we are at increased risk for heart disease in postmenopause, again, because of all of that decline in estrogen. And women, it's the #1 killer of women is heart disease. The genital urinary syndrome of menopause. This is something most women do not know. They've never heard the word. They have no clue. This is really common in women in postmenopause. It affects up to 80% of menopausal women and is caused by low estrogen levels in the tissues of the urinary tract and the female genital tract. Common symptoms which affect many, many women. We don't like to talk about it. Believe me, I can't believe that I'm actually having a conversation about these topics, but because of my own experience, I'm such a fierce advocate for women understanding this. This is all about the vaginal dryness, burning, itching that you can get, painful sex, urinary tract infections, urgency, frequency, incontinence. It's all about those topics that are so important for women. And there's so many safe and effective treatments that are available if we just understood it. And if we just talked about it more, women could prepare. So because of all of these things, because it's not just about suffering through symptoms for a decade or more, it's not just about the long-term health risks, it's the reality of the ageism and sexism that pervades this time of life. We decided we were going to create the Menopause Foundation of Canada, a national nonprofit advocacy organization. We are evidence-based. we are guided by a medical advisory board of some of Canada's top OB-GYN menopause specialists. And our goals are really simple. We want to break the silence and the stigma of menopause. If we can do that, we think we're going to close the menopause knowledge gap. We want to improve health equity. We want to increase access to menopause care and treatment. And finally, we want to create menopause inclusive workplaces. And that's where all of you can play a significant role. In 2022, and our organization was officially launched in 2022, we had done some planning in 2021, but we knew that women telling their own stories about menopause was not enough to garner the attention and the credibility that this topic deserves. So we set out to work with Leger Canada to create a landmark report called The Silence and the Stigma, Menopause in Canada. We surveyed Canadian women between the ages of 40 and 60. These are women who are in the zone for, should be in the zone for knowing and understanding menopause and what's going to happen to their bodies. The statistics were startling, but not surprising to our medical advisory board and to people who work with women all the time in this time of their life. Our data showed that 1 in 2 women feel unprepared for menopause. 1 in 2 women are blindsided by menopause. In a world where no topic is off limits, menopause is still a taboo, with more than 54% believing that they can't have a conversation about this topic. We believe that that's because menopause is wrapped in this nice little gift of ageism and sexism. Women are not valued as we get older in our society. You know, men develop gravitas. An older woman and an aging woman, particularly a menopausal woman, is perceived negatively. Menopause is overwhelmingly viewed as negative, with really harsh stereotypes of, you know, the woman who's sweating and going through this time of her life. It's actually quite sad, and that needs to change, because menopause is a great time of life. There's so much to look forward to. We have more wisdom, we have more knowledge. None of us want to be 30 again or 20 again. So we need to really reflect on the ageism that pervades this conversation and prevents it from happening. Sadly, we believe because of that, 4 in 10 women feel alone during menopause. Just think about that. It's a universal experience. Every woman will go through it. And yet we have so many women feeling so alone. We looked at the healthcare system in our survey, and this is what we found. Less than 1/4 of survey respondents felt that they were very knowledgeable about perimenopause or menopause. Remember, these are women between the ages of 40 and 60. Knowledge of symptoms. So, you know, in the yellow there, that's the, you know, people being aware. So hot flashes and night sweats, you know, 84%, 77%, period changes, 70%. It's not 100%. It's not 95%. Sleep disturbance. And then it gets lower and lower for things like urinary tract infections, heart palpitations, skin issues, pain during intercourse, incontinence, depression, low libido, fatigue, anxiety, all of these things that we should be aware of, we're not. And because we're not aware and we don't understand, we cannot connect the dots on these symptoms. And what ends up happening is, if you go to your doctor, you end up being treated for specific symptoms instead of being treated for the reality of you are in perimenopause, menopause. In terms of physicians, 77% of women are very comfortable speaking with their physician. In fact, the physician was the most trusted source for information about menopause, but fewer than 1/4 said their family physician proactively discussed menopause with them. Of the women who decided to seek medical advice themselves, and we know anecdotally that it takes a long time for women to actually go to their doctor. They usually are suffering through a lot of symptoms before they take that step. For those that did, 72% found the advice to be not helpful or only somewhat helpful, and 4 in 10 women felt their symptoms were undertreated. We hear this all the time, women going to their doctors saying their doctor gives them an antidepressant when they're not depressed. Low mood associated with menopause is not clinical depression, but doctors are more comfortable prescribing an antidepressant than they are with menopause hormone therapy, and we can talk about that. Just one more note on the healthcare system. You know, it is so important that women's issues be taken more seriously. This is something that, again, affects half the population, and yet our medical community gets almost no education. They go to school. This is not to in any way insult the medical community. We know they're overstretched. We know how challenging it is. And we also know that they're not trained to have discussions with women and to support women through this time of life. And that really, really needs to change. And we are advocating for that. And I can share some of that with you. Okay, now to the part that is probably of most interest for this group, the workplace. 5 million women over the age of 40 in Canada. We represent 25% of the workforce. We're a really, really important group of women, particularly during this time of the Great Resignation, the war for talent. In this era of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you cannot have an organization that can claim to be DEI forward or progressive if you have not looked at menopause. And we know that 1 in 10 women are estimated to leave the workforce due to menopause, but there's other data as well, not Canadian data, but there's data in the US, there's data from the UK about missed days from work, women taking lesser roles, stepping back, moving out of the workforce, but not completely, and taking different kinds of jobs. We have examples like that all the time from women who talk to us about their own experience. And we believe that menopause is the missing link as to why more women are not breaking through the glass ceiling. You cannot have that glass ceiling conversation if you're not willing to talk about menopause. And that conversation is starting to happen. This is a quote from the Harvard Business Review going back a few years, where they say about menopause intersecting a critical career stage. It occurs between the ages of 45 and 55, which is also the age bracket during which most women are most likely to move into top leadership positions. And if we want to continue to move the needle on women in leadership roles, and I believe if you want to continue to retain our talented women, you know, when we are in that zone of 45 to 55, you all know we're incredibly valuable to an organization because of our expertise, our skills, our leadership, all that we bring to an organization. Companies can't afford to lose women at this time of life, and it does have an impact on the bottom line. In our data, we saw that 74% of women felt that their employer was not supportive in helping them cope with their symptoms or did not know if they had support. Overwhelmingly, though, when we asked the question about, do you want support, should there be support, 87% agreed that women need support through all stages of life. 75% agreed that employers would benefit from offering support to women. So clearly, there is a value and there's a desire for this kind of support. Another important development is that we now have women, older women, like Michelle Obama, like Oprah Winfrey. We have many celebrities talking about their menopausal experience. And, you know, the good news is that it's cracking open the conversation. It's trying to change the face of aging. The double-edged sword on that one is that we cannot have women relying on influencers like Goop or Gwyneth Paltrow for their menopausal advice. We need to ensure that we are evidence-based. But here you see the phenomenal Michelle Obama talking about menopause in the workplace. She's going to an event and she's having a hot flash. And she describes it as, you know, somebody putting a furnace inside of her and she's getting hot. And then she thinks, I can't do this. And women go through those experiences all the time. I must stop and say that while the majority of women experience menopausal symptoms, for some women, they feel like the symptoms are not very impactful to their life. So we know that 25% of women will have what we consider more severe symptoms, and that three out of 4 women will have symptoms that impact their daily lives. But there is a percentage of women who feel like they so-called breeze through. I think for many of those women, they do not understand all of the symptoms, because I've talked to many of them who will say, well, I breeze through it, and yet they're suffering with pretty severe anxiety, or they have osteopenia, at an early age, or they might have had a vaginal prolapse, and they're not necessarily associating that with menopause. So what does menopause look like in the workplace? Here's some examples. It can be colleagues running to the bathroom to wait out a hot flash, or to search for paper towels, looking for a cold drink. Heavy periods. This is something that I did not realize was such a significant issue, because it was not my issue. There are women who go through very heavy periods during their perimenopause. For some of these women, you need frequent bathroom breaks. You might need a change of clothes. There is a story of one woman who she would be laughed at by her colleagues, because her boss would say, why are you going to the bathroom all the time? And her colleagues would actually make jokes. Oh, she comes in the morning in one outfit, and she leaves at the end of the day in a different outfit. She was really embarrassed. She really struggled with this. Some people skip meetings, sending someone else because they have anxiety, or they feel they can't cope, or they feel so exhausted that they're not going to perform at their best. Some people skip business trips because of exhaustion or fear of heavy periods, which for some people might make leaving home a bit challenging. Brain fog, memory issues. You might have that person in a meeting who it's quite common for menopausal women to sort of forget nouns of things. Like you know what the word is, it's at the tip of your tongue, but you just can't say it. And that can happen more and more in meetings. One woman, there's a story of a woman who she got a new job at a VP level. She was going through perimenopause, understood that she was going through perimenopause. She was having memory issues, and she went through her 3-month probation period. Everything was great, very happy with her performance. She talked to her manager, who was a woman, and she thought that might make it an easier conversation. And she said, I'm going through perimenopause, having these memory issues. She said, I remember everything about the conversation and I take my notes, but I struggle with names. So you might see me struggling with somebody's name, the name of the company. It was just her challenge, and she wanted to be upfront and transparent. She said that really turned for her in her workplace. All of a sudden, within 6 weeks, she was let go. And she really struggled with that, blamed herself, went into a very dark place. And it's taken her a lot of time to come out of that and to recognize she's incredibly talented, top of her game, knows what she's doing. She just worked in an environment, like many environments, where if women don't understand what's happening to their own bodies, how can we expect managers and employers to be proactive and progressive on these things? So those are some examples of what menopause can look like in the workplace. There's this other reality of ageism, and we talked a little bit about this, but in our survey, 3 in 10 women worried about people knowing that they were in menopause because it might make others see them as weak, old, or past their prime. And I can tell you that my co-founder, my amazing, phenomenal co-founder of the Menopause Foundation of Canada, Trish Barbado, who had her own difficult menopause journey and had to change her career trajectory as well because of her menopause. But we were not going to tackle the workplace at all because of the fear that, you know, the accepted behaviors with which women can exhibit in the workplace, it's more narrow than it is for men. As you get older, we do believe that there is ageism, and we didn't want one more thing for an employer to think about. Well, oh my gosh, why would you hire her, promote her? She's going to go through menopause. We didn't want to disadvantage women in any way, but we realized after going through all of the research and the data and talking to more and more people that we have to take this on. We are losing women. Women are stepping back because they don't understand their symptoms and they don't know how to manage their symptoms. And that's a tragedy, and it's an equity issue, and it needs to change. So I'm going to talk about calls to action. What, as an organization, what is the Menopause Foundation of Canada asking folks to do? For women, knowledge is power. We really advocate women to seek evidence-based information, understand what's happening to your body, advocate for yourself with your healthcare provider, break the silence and the stigma with your friends, your family, open up that dialogue, and don't let menopause be a punchline. It is, again, perceived as something as negative, and it's often the butt of jokes. And it really is, menopause is a wonderful time of life. We're at this great period of, a second journey of really doing the things that we think we can do to make a difference. And we have to crack open that conversation. Menopausal symptoms. I'm sharing this here with the team, with this group, so that you're aware of what these symptoms can look like. We break them into 4 different categories. There's physical symptoms, mood, genital, urinary, and sexual health, and then cognition and sleep, which is, as I've mentioned, really important. So physical, the things like the hot flashes and night sweats, the period changes, body aches, fatigue, headaches, skin and hair changes, heart palpitations. There's more on this list. Dry eye, for example, is another one. Mood. So anxiety can increase during menopause, perimenopause, menopause. Some women enter depression. If you are a woman who suffered from depression prior to your menopause, if you dealt with postpartum depression, your likelihood of going into a menopause-induced depression increases. There is low mood associated with menopause. This should not be confused with clinical depression. Many women talk to us about you feel a bit not yourself. For some women, you can lose confidence. You might have mood swings. All of those things are not a clinical depression. And many women are being prescribed antidepressants when they really shouldn't be. Low motivation or energy, crying spells, all of these things can impact your mood. Genital, urinary, and sexual health. I talked a little bit about this already. And then cognition and sleep, because, they need more data and more research in all of these areas. But we know that if you're not sleeping well, that does impact your cognition and concentration and all of those things. And, as a woman who did not sleep through the night for probably 7 years, I can tell you it really does have an impact. How do you manage your menopause? And we talk to women about managing menopause your way. This is not a one size fits all. Everybody will have a different experience going through their menopause journey. So there's all kinds of things we can do, though. Of course, close the knowledge gap, understand what's happening to you. There's lifestyle changes, preventative care. That's the foundation. If you feel you need support and help, there's non-prescription treatments. There's non-hormonal prescription medicine, and then there's menopause hormone therapy. Lifestyle, it's all the things that we know we should do, but we struggle to do. And it's a struggle when you're suffering through symptoms, I can tell you. Move your body every day, eating well, that maintaining a healthy body weight, really hard because we've got that weight distribution happens. Prioritizing weight-bearing exercises because we know about the osteoporosis risk. If you're smoking, stop. Reducing alcohol consumption, trying to reduce anxiety and stress, getting a good night's sleep, and considering yoga, meditation, or some sort of a gratitude practice. There's many non-prescription options, cognitive behavioral therapy, has been shown to benefit some people. There's sort of weak plant-derived estrogen, soy foods, things like that. There's a lot of over-the-counter and herbal products. The data on these things are limited, and the data that exists shows that for many people they're ineffective. But for some people, they feel like they do help them. Menopause hormone therapy, I pause for a moment here because this is the gold standard treatment for hot flashes and night sweats. It's been studied for decades, and it is a safe and effective treatment, and yet women are scared to take it because of headlines going back more than 20 years, which suggested that it increased your risk for cancer and all kinds of things. Menopause hormone therapy also helps to prevent bone loss and also helps with the genitourinary syndrome of menopause. And according to the North American Menopause Society, the benefits of hormone therapy outweigh the risk for most healthy, symptomatic women who are aged younger than 60 years and within 10 years of your menopause onset. And I'm not promoting hormone therapy, but I would be remiss in not talking about it because it is the gold standard treatment. It can be a game changer for many women, and we should not be afraid to take this product. It's a decision making with your physician where you're looking at your own particular potential health risks and also your own health goals and looking at the benefits and the potential risks for you, and then making a decision if you're dealing with symptoms. Hormone therapy may also relieve low mood, brain fog, low libido, and helps with poor sleep. We're also asking people to join our community, menopausefoundationcanada.ca. It's a free membership. And when you join, you can get access to a downloadable symptom tracker. There's all kinds of evidence-based information. We connect with data and curate content from the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada, the Canadian Menopause Society. These are the medical organization, the North American Menopause Society, the International Menopause Society. So it's evidence-based content that you will find on our site. And by joining, you help us with our advocacy to government and others as we're looking to make change. I'm going to do that one last, and I'm actually going to go second to the healthcare community, because with the healthcare community, we're asking them, we're actually going to be lobbying for more menopause training and education. That's a given. It's so important. We want the healthcare community to proactively talk to their patients about menopause, to not ignore or minimize or trivialize symptoms, to validate the symptoms, to talk about the benefits and not just the risks of certain treatments. And if a physician is not comfortable treating, refer them to a medical menopause specialist. And on our website, we actually have a Find a Physician tool, which connects to the North American Menopause Society. And you can plug in your postal code and you can find a North American Menopause NAMS certified practitioner in your community. It's not a perfect list, but it's a good starting point. Okay, menopause inclusive workplaces. We want workplaces to break the stigma of menopause. We want and believe that there's 3 key things that organizations need to do. You need to have awareness and education sessions. Start at the top of the house. Our senior leaders need to understand the impact of menopause. Managers need to understand this. And then sessions for employees to raise awareness. Review existing policies. Not every organization needs to have a separate menopause policy. These things can be integrated into existing policies, but you need to review them to make sure that you are thinking about menopause. And then, of course, ensuring a robust benefits plan. Do you cover different menopausal treatments? Do you cover things like pelvic floor physiotherapy? All of the things that women going through their menopause might need. Lessons learned from the UK. The UK is really leading the way. I would say Canada is lagging on the world stage, but we have a real opportunity to be a leader, and I don't see any reason why we can't be, given how progressive we are on diversity, equity, and inclusion matters. they recognized in the UK through a lot of advocacy, but also through some MPs really taking on this as a cause. So Carolyn Harris was a Labour MP. Her quote here, "You wouldn't dream of having a workplace where people weren't supported because they were pregnant." And it's exactly the same for women with menopause. They created an all-party parliamentary committee where they looked at menopause. They came out with a report with recommendations. Essentially in the UK, they recognize the impact of menopause on women's health, on family, community, the workplace, but more importantly, on the country's economy. And I think that's where we need to get to with menopause in Canada. Some companies, they started this menopause workplace pledge to break the taboo and to take action. An organization did that. There were more than 600 companies that signed on to that, which is fantastic. Leading organizations, for example, Aviva, an insurance company, they launched a menopause support app. They offer employees free consultation with a menopause specialist. They have menopause awareness session for their employees. So there's lots and lots of examples from the UK. And Lanny sent through a list of resources. She just compiled this outstanding list of what is out there so you can see what organizations are doing. When I started the Menopause Foundation of Canada, before the report went out, I talked to different organizations. I talked to an EVP of one of the largest employers in Canada, and he told me at the time that menopause had never crossed his desk. I talked to other organizations where very well-intentioned people said, well, menopause is just a niche issue. It's not something important for all employees. And then, of course, when you look at the statistics on it, you know, 1/4 of the workforce, 1 in 100 women entering it before the age of 40, etc. This is not a niche issue. It's also a natural phase of life like pregnancy, but the difference is pregnancy doesn't happen to every woman. Menopause does. So what actions can you take? And here's some things that people are doing in organizations where they're leading the way. Flexible work schedules. When I was going through my perimenopause, menopause, it was before the reality of COVID. There was was kind of frowned upon a little bit, taking a lot of flex time. You know, that's a lot easier for employers to do today, which is just outstanding, but flexible work schedules could be very helpful. For frontline or shift workers, options to take more frequent breaks or longer breaks, or to change their schedules when possible. Access to cold drinking water in bathrooms are important. Adequate ventilation or control of workplace temperature if possible. Menopause-friendly dress code or uniforms, you know, made of natural fibers. I think of all of the PSWs, some of them working with, you know, very thick uniforms. And we know that a large percentage of nurses, PSWs, are in those menopausal years. Period products in the bathroom, because I've talked about heavy periods being a real problem and the need for changing that. Creation of employee resource groups where people can get support. HR becoming knowledgeable about menopause. You know, we need HR to lead in organizations. And then, of course, I mentioned the awareness and education sessions for everyone. And that's it. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you have lots of questions. And I'm going to stop sharing here and pass it back to Lorraine.
Janet, thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. So watching the chat and the questions as it went along, and I think a lot of people starting to make connections with themselves, with workplace, et cetera. So thank you so much for that. Absolutely fabulous. So we do have a couple of questions. I'll start with from the Q&A. There's just a few people talking about what to do if you can't get support. You talked a little bit about your site. Is there anything else you'd like to say about that?
Well, I would say, you know, can't get support from your
medical doctor.
Your medical doctor, yes. Well, first and foremost, do some reading and really educate yourself on menopause. Download the symptom tracker. One of the challenges that we hear from doctors actually is that when women come into their appointments, they're not themselves very clear on what's happening to them. So the more we can be clear about our own symptoms and our own experience, the easier it will be for our healthcare practitioners to support us. But that being said, our data is pretty clear. We know they're not healthcare practitioners, through no fault of their own, are not as well educated as they need to be. So, go to the Find a Physician tab on our website, plug in your postal code, look for a menopause practitioner, ask to be referred to a specialist. I would just say one thing that was surprising to me, another reason why we created the Menopause Foundation of Canada, I just assumed that if you're an OB-GYN, you understand menopause. That's actually not the case. Even our specialists, who you would think would understand this, they do not. And they get very little training unless they focus on that area. And there's so few of them that do. That's why you need to really look for somebody who's qualified. I would also say that because there's such a vacuum, that vacuum has been met by, oh my goodness, I think
We
it's
came back. We froze for a second.
Yeah, you know what? I have to plug in. Can I just pause and just plug in? I'm so
Do what
sorry.
you need to do. Just while Janet's doing that, I'm just gonna say what she was just saying about physicians. Somebody put in the chat, and I think this is really poignant. Thank you for that. I'm not as crazy and dramatic as my doctor believes that I am, which I think, we need to be, as women, to be able to advocate. And it's very difficult in the face of that kind of reaction. So thank you for sharing that, Yvonne. I'm absolutely positive you are not the only one that has gone through that.
You are not alone. That is, that's actually something that we tell women all the time. And validating our experience and our symptoms is important. What I was going to say before my battery started to die on me is there is this vacuum. It's been filled by a lot of hormone clinics that have popped up. And there's something that we don't understand either. There's regulated and unregulated products. And there are different places offering what they call so-called compounded bioidentical hormones. These are just marketing terms. You can get bioidentical hormone therapy, if that's the path that you might be going down, that are Health Canada approved from your doctor. And for most women, that product will be covered through some sort of a health plan. The thing about unregulated, compounded hormones is that you cannot be guaranteed each and every time you're getting a specific dose. If you are on menopause hormone therapy and you have a uterus, you need to protect the lining of your uterus. So if you're taking estrogen, you must take a progesterone with that, or progestin. And it has to be balanced, which is why, you want to ensure you're getting the right dose all the time. So that's just for us as an organization. We're not suggesting like this is all about choice and everybody chooses to do what they want. But in terms of being in the evidence-based lane and following the guidance of North American Menopause Society and all of the treatment guidelines, that's just something that women need to be aware of, because there's this myth that the bioidenticals I can only get if I pay for them, going to a certain clinic. The reality is there's lots of bioidenticals that are Health Canada approved.
Thank you, Janet. There are quite a few. I'm just going to say, if I miss anyone's questions, we'll go back through them at the end, because lots of people are writing lots of comments as well in the chat. Several of them are quite medical, so we will follow back up with you, but I will ask, probably great to speak to your doctor or physician about some of the questions that I'm seeing. But there's a few here as well. Just asking, Janet, can you say more about best practices for employers covering specific types of menopause treatments? So such as you mentioned through benefit plans. For example, you mentioned pelvic floor physio. Are there other treatments that you would recommend be covered that we advocate for?
Yeah, I think on the benefits plan side, I suspect that most employers do a pretty good job on this front, but really look at all of the menopause hormone therapy options that are available and cover those, because women need choice. You know, there's different types of vaginal estrogen. Vaginal estrogen is really important for the genitourinary syndrome of menopause. You know, you can use vaginal lubricants and moisturizers, but it's the estrogen that deals with the underlying issues there, and it comes in different forms. So do you cover all of the different forms? Do you cover the tablets? Do you cover the gels? Like all of that, being comprehensive with that. There's for, you know, women who either don't want to or can't take menopause hormone therapy, and there's many different types of menopause hormone therapy. So, you know, making sure that the body identical patches are available, not just the older technology, which is the pill formats, you know, making sure that you've got all of that covered. But then there's products that are older products that are, you know, second line treatments for women who can't do the hormone therapy, like gabapentin and clonidine and a bunch of others as well. Expanding, you know, when you look at the other supports, the pelvic floor physiotherapy is important for women. Some women, cognitive behavioral therapy can be very important, you know, making sure there's supports with mental health. Mental health is a challenge for women going through menopause because of the low mood that can strike many. And then, of course, for a certain percentage of women actually going through depression during menopause. So just a very robust benefits plan is what I would say. And I know we tend to not have as much there on like the healthcare spending accounts, but maybe thinking of the healthcare spending account where we are increasing the limits, because $300 for physiotherapy is not a lot.
Really broad selection. I think, as you showed us, a really broad type of symptoms that can happen. So
That's right.
yeah, thank you, Janet. Someone has asked, I just have to pause and say the number of, you've really impacted people, a number of questions and comments, and you'll see them later, that are coming up, just talking, people saying how much they want to be advocates in this field, and that you're preparing them to be advocates, and this presentation is preparing them to be advocates. So thank you for that. It's wonderful to see. Someone asked, what's the evidence around genetic similarities in menopausal experience? She says, I'm curious if some women overlook their set of symptoms because their mother had a different or more limited set of symptoms.
It's interesting. I think the challenge for most of us is that many of our mothers didn't talk about it, you know, depending on how old you are. You know, there's a generation of being pretty stoic and silent about what they were doing and just saying it's fine. I know my own mother, when I asked her, she just said, if you let it bother you, it will. And, you know, it's surprising, right, that there's so little conversation, even in families, amongst sisters, amongst friends. I do believe that's changing. You know, I'm 55, but I believe that, and I'm Gen X, but I think the younger Gen Xers, it's that generation and the millennials that are going to completely blow this thing up because they're online more, they're talking more. And I don't know that we can, you know, really trust conversations with moms and older sisters about this. You know, if you have that, you're lucky that you do, and that's great.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, along the advocacy line, someone's saying that they're trying to think of how to add this to the Psychological Health and Safety Committee at their workplace, like how to introduce this kind of topic.
Well, I think
experience with that.
Yeah, I've been doing more and more workplace talks. So examples of that would be, did a piece with a CBC, with Metrolinx, with the RCMP. Organizations are now recognizing that they do have, in many cases, a large workforce of women, and they want to retain those women. So I think anybody in any organization should be saying, let's start doing these awareness raising sessions. I actually don't believe this is, you know, having been an executive around the boardroom table, I think organizations can make this complicated or we can keep it simple. And I'm always one for keeping it simple. I think in most organizations, we already have some pretty good policies. We need to look at adding on and making sure menopause is reflected in that, and thinking through what else you may need to do in your specific organization. But the hardest thing to do, because you can go through the benefits and you can go through the policies, and that's a process that organizations can do. The biggest commitment and the hardest thing to do is the education and the awareness. That just takes time. And there's ways to do it. No woman wants to walk around the workplace with a big M on her shirt. I'm in menopause, and it's not something everybody wants to talk about. So you have to find ways to respectfully incorporate that, and to not make it like, oh, we now all you, are you in menopause or not? Self-declared. No, that is not respectful, right?
Mhm. Lots of comments coming up here around, is menopause considered a disability? Some people saying it's temporary disability. Some people asking if it's recognized as a disability under the Human Rights Code. I'd like your opinion on that, Janet. And then Lanny, I'm wondering if you want to speak to that a little bit from a worker's perspective, if you've had any experience with that. So Janet, I'll bump to you first. Is it recognized as a disability?
It's an interesting question. We are actually exploring as an organization right now whether it should be recognized as a protected characteristic, like under the human rights codes, because pregnancy is there. So that's something that we're looking at. I personally, and we haven't thought through this, so I'm really open to feedback from women like yourselves about what you think of this. I don't know that it's a disability, because it's something you're in for the rest of your life. Do you need accommodations? Are there things where it could be helpful for you to take time off, to have flexible work arrangements, to have organizations that are really mindful of that, and to make sure that it's comprehensive for you? I know in the UK, for example, the mayor of London was going to be piloting a menopause leave policy. I know that the UK government, that was actually a recommendation from the all-party parliamentary committee. And then the government looked at those recommendations and said, we don't agree with that recommendation, that there should be standard menopausal leave. And they gave a bunch of reasons why they didn't agree with that. So yeah, I'm curious what Lanny thinks about this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know what, I think building on that, and I've seen some comments pop up that I would agree with as well. So the menopause itself is not necessarily a disability. The symptoms can be disabling, and that's depending on the severity of it, where I think at disability management professionals, that's where we would be looking at what is it that's going on with you, and symptoms. I was thinking as we're talking about a nurse who's scrubbed into the OR, as the nurse who's assisting with the OR, they may need to be accommodated so that they're circulating and not scrubbed, so that they are able to leave the room if they need to, and they're not covered in layers of gowns and masks and everything else because of these severe hot flashes. So is that a way that we could accommodate somebody changing their rotation so they're doing slightly different work for a period of time? I think that is where we would look at. I really like the idea, Janet, of as DMs, how do we help people? How do we have these conversations? And the whole purpose of this is to start the conversation, and it's so exciting that we're doing that. But that symptom tracker, we can refer individuals to get a copy of that and look at it and share that take that to their doctors, right? We can refer them to the website to get additional information. Some really simple tools like that where we can help people have that conversation. Because I do think about nursing, and I just, as I'm working here, and I've been nursing for 30 some years. And I've been on staff with the BC Nurses Union over 20 years, and we have 48,000 members, probably 90% plus are women. Our average age is around 46. Like you say, do the math. And I have never heard this conversation in all of my years as an activist and in labor relations and in disability management within healthcare sectors. So I know a couple of my colleagues there I can see online, and yes, we're going to advance this and take this further, right? And I think about other sectors that are so heavily female populated, education, et cetera. So I think it is, you look at each case individually. I kind of digress there as I went my own experiences, but you're looking at each of the symptoms, and somebody talked about the severity of, anxiety or depression, then yes, you may need to be accommodated. You may need to try to get routine sleep so you're not working rotating shifts. So maybe you're being accommodated into a permanent, days, evening type rotation. So very much the work needs to be done, and we need to push the conversation, and we need to push the role to support individuals. Like I just think about attendance wellness promotions where you're above average, so you get called into a conversation with your manager because you're above average for leave of absence, right? And those, it doesn't take into account anything of that nature, because in those questions it's like, do you have when you have a meeting like that, do you have a disability that's keeping you from not working? Well, no. A woman's not going to answer, is likely not going to answer, I have, menopause and I'm struggling and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Right? They're not likely going to pull it together based on, what you've discovered through your research, Janet. So I'll leave it at that.
That's so
Yeah,
insightful, Lanny,
Sorry.
very insightful. And I love your example of the nurse in the OR, because, I said that I think menopause is the missing link as to why more women aren't breaking through the glass ceiling. I think it's also a missing link to understanding why women are leaving the nursing profession. When you've got that high percentage of women right in the zone of being in their perimenopause, menopause, and we know that the job is hard, and now they're wearing all the PPE and the long hours. And if you're dealing with any of these symptoms and your employer isn't aware, and there's no accommodation for that, and there's no appreciation of that, you're going to get burnt out. So that's something that we've been thinking about as an organization, like this focus on certain professions where women dominate. And I think nursing is just a good example of the real need to reflect on menopause, its impact, and how do you change that environment for women? If we're serious about keeping women employed in nursing, I think it has to be part of the conversation.
Thank you both for that. I was just going to share that from an employer perspective, it's your example, Lanny, of an attendance interview is a great one. As women, we really need to learn to be able to advocate for ourselves. So I might not have a disability, but I have a medical need. And to be able to go to the physician and to provide that information to your employer, because if we don't provide the information to the employer, then we can't accommodate and we can't work around that. So such an important topic. And I think this goes back to what you said, Janet. It really starts with education, right? Very much starts with education to recognize that these might be symptoms. I might not be just going through something completely alone. And as I started my experience talking to people, and I kid you not, some of the people that I talked to, I had a waitress in a restaurant get up and give me a hug at the end of my meal because her and I had gotten into this conversation because she asked me what I was working on at the table. So really, really fascinating and so important. Someone just asked about probiotics, your thoughts on that for, gastrointestinal vaginal symptoms. Is there anything you know about that piece?
No, I don't have a lot of information or any information actually on probiotics. The vaginal symptoms, the genitourinary syndrome of menopause, the treatment guidelines are pretty clear in terms of vaginal moisturizers, lubricants, for which there are lots, but then also for these symptoms, which can get worse over time, the vaginal estrogen, and there's a couple of new products that are coming on the market as well. And these are all very safe and effective treatments. And, you know, we know women who are, for some women, you know, it's not just about sexual health. You can be walking down the street and you can feel like you've got sandpaper, you know, it can be very uncomfortable sitting, standing, doing work. And many women don't understand that there's something you can do about that. And that's not just, well, it's just aging. But if you're having these problems, the likelihood that it will get worse is pretty real, you know? So you have to start taking care of that now.
Thank you. And again, something that women don't generally discuss.
No.
I refer to it as the desert. Just seeing if there's any other questions that I haven't touched base on. Lots and lots of people thanking you for an amazing presentation.
Lorraine, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay,
Lanny,
great. I'm just
please.
going to pop in. So, you know, I stumbled upon this when I was doing some research around arthritis, and then read an article about the Arthritis Society of Canada changing their policies, workplace policies, to be, you know, menopause aware. I'm not quite sure what the right phrase is. I'm just wondering about, and you touched on this before, but how do we go about making some of those policy changes, or are there resources through the Menopause Foundation to support workplaces to do that?
Well, we're actually, I believe I mentioned we're coming out with a new Menopause in the Workplace report, which is going to be launched in October. Part of that is going to be creating a toolkit for employers. So we want employers to have a toolkit that would be, you know, here's the things you need to do. Here's an example of a policy. Here's examples of how you can improve your benefits plans and what to include, so that we would have a package that's available. So that is something that we're working on right now. And we're very excited about it because we think there's a desire for employers to actually take that step. They just need some guidance and direction. And yeah, so we're very keen on that. The Arthritis Society, Lanny, the co-founder of the Menopause Foundation of Canada is Trish Barbado, and she's also the president of the Arthritis Society of Canada. So of course, she just said, well, I'm just going to look at what our existing policy and make sure that menopause is referenced, and that there's, you know, if women need to feel comfortable talking about their symptoms and getting time off work and things like that. So she did that, but of course she had a personal interest and passion in it to make that happen.
Wonderful to see, again, the number of advocates that you're creating in one call. Just think of how that, you know, opening this dialogue, all of us opening this dialogue in our different workplaces and in our different environments could have such a huge impact.
Well, in the UK, one of the things that they've done that was recommended in that all-party parliamentary committee, and which the government also recommended as well, was the creation of like a menopause champion in the workplace, you know, somebody who's really knowledgeable and can help. It may not be, I don't think there's a one size fits all, because every organization is different and what works in one will not work in the other, but all of you, you know, be your own champion for your own health. But I do think you can play such an important role in raising the conversation and trying to push, even if it's done in a small way. I think when people hear the information, it's quite eye-opening. You just go, what? Oh, it's not, you're just not finished with it. It's not over. And people can have these symptoms for several years. It's quite illuminating.
Thank you. I would agree. And I'm just, you know, I was just pondering as you were talking about, wondering if there's anyone on the call who wasn't surprised by at least one symptom, who really had all of that knowledge. And I think likely not. We had another question. How do you attract the attention to this topic to the employers and employees? Sometimes using the word menopause brings on the stigma of taboo or jokes. Very true. Very true. Any just suggestions on that? How to raise that conversation, I guess.
This is where I think we have to go there and break through some of that noise. I do like the idea of starting. Sometimes you start at the top and sometimes you kind of do it more grassroots. But I believe that if employers actually understood the impact to the business, if they recognized that, you know, what is the percentage of your workforce that are women between the ages of, you know, 35 and 60? That is usually a pretty big percentage of employees. And when you do the math on when women enter perimenopause, you know, starting in their 40s, but really in their 30s. So the business case for having the conversation, I think, is really clear. And once the senior leaders get on board with that, I think that's pretty impactful. The other piece tying it to that is diversity, equity, and inclusion. You cannot be DEI if you ignore menopause, because it is a gender equity. It's an age equity issue that needs to be addressed. So that's why we've deliberately wrapped our advocacy around DEI in the workplace. And we called it, in the UK, they've called it menopause friendly workplaces. That's kind of the thing that they went with. And we said, no, it's not about being friendly. We're women, we don't need you to be friendly, but we want equity. You need to have menopause inclusive workplaces and gender equity for women in the workplace, as we have done with other stages of life. You must do for this stage of life. And I think having, you know, when you bring in people like me or others who can share their experience and tell the story of women around what they may experience, it just hits home a little differently for people. Because you don't want this to be so serious. And the one thing that I struggle with sometimes, frankly, is that you can focus so much on the symptoms and it can become kind of scary, like, what? Oh my goodness, you know, I might be going through this for a decade and I could be struggling with all of these things. And you forget all of the good things, the things to look forward to. And I just liken it to if anyone has had children, you prepare so much, you know, what to expect when expecting. You know, women have told you everybody's got like a labor delivery war story that they share with other women. So there's lots of things that you can worry about, but the preparation of it, and then knowing that at the end of it, everything is going to be fine. And I think with menopause, it's the same. Be prepared, understand it. And the more you know, the better you're going to be able to proactively manage symptoms. And I wish, you know, women in their 20s and 30s knew about bone health, and that we need to prioritize weights over cardio, and that, you know, taking time for ourselves is not being selfish. It's actually for your health and longevity, and being more and more clear about that, because many women, myself included, you get to that menopausal stage. And, you know, I was very inconsistent with everything related to health, whether that was diet, exercise. You know, I've dropped probably 20 pounds since I hit my menopause, and things start going crazy. So it's not easy, but the more you know, the more you prepare, the better able you are to recognize that it is a pretty cool time of life. You know, we're really coming into our own. We don't care as much about what other people think of us. We're pretty confident. We know what we know what we don't know. And you know, we're ready to take things on. But if you're struggling with symptoms, it is not easy to have that energy to do your work, to take care of your family, to take care of yourself. And that's what we want women to know. Do not suffer in silence. Do not think that you can just deal with this. And why should we be dealing with these symptoms for several years, a decade or more? Why does society expect that women should just put up with this? That's crazy. You would never tell men to do that.
Somebody put a comment that if men went through this, we'd have different solutions by this time. You said a lot there, Janet, but there's a few that I just wanted to land on. One, the question really was around how to bring this to the workplace. And I think you started with the evidence-based, the number of women in the workplace, the number of women of this age in the workplace. So taking us back to the evidence base that you started with, and the link to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that this is an inclusion issue. So I really like that, and appreciated the positive spin that you shared there, that this is life, and it is going to happen, and there, you know, it is an important part of our lives as women. So I really like that positive ending to that as well. Lanny, did you want to add anything?
I just wanted to extend my gratitude as well to you, Janet, for your sharing, for your candor and your own experience, and then sharing the study and the ways that we can move forward and take charge of ourselves and our own lives, and for our friends and our family and colleagues, etc. How important this all is, and I'm just so grateful. I think we nailed all those objectives you laid out for us, Lorraine. And you know, I know personally within my organization, this is just the start, and we'll be taking this forward and moving more around that. Because one of the other pieces that came, we're working on DEI within our own organization, but also towards a psychologically safe workplace. And I think this ties in to those standards as well. So thank you to everyone for your questions, for your comments, your time. And I know that you will be taking this back and sharing this information. Again, it will be, it's been recorded, and we will be sharing this. You've got the information about different resources, and having been on the Menopause Foundation site myself many times, it has excellent resources as well to take action on. And I think I can safely say, if people are interested in expanding on this and bringing it to their workplaces, they can contact you, right, Janet, or contact the foundation.
Oh,
link.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day and stay well. Bye for now.
Thank you all.